we had a pretty large bang associated with the caution and warning now. Okay, so we have an apparent serious oxygen leak.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Houston, we've had a problem. He's in a roll and he can't stop it. Performing an evasive maneuver. Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. I think we need to do a little more all-weather testing.
Welcome to space. Space.
Hello, listener, and welcome to Failure to Launch, the space history podcast where we take you through all the mistakes, failures, and explosions that made modern space exploration possible. We are your hosts, Quinn, he, him.
Chris, he, him.
And a pensive Chris, he, him.
And today we are back to continue our series on Mittelwerk, the concentration camp that churned out Hitler's vengeance weapons. Now, I realize this is kind of a loaded question immediately after hearing that last sentence, but how are you guys doing today?
I'm doing okay.
Nice.
I'm okay. I went to bed late and had to wake up early because I'm on call. So I had the thing come in at like 4:30 in the morning.
Brackets listener, he is on call for podcasting. This is a policy that we have at Failure to Launch Communications Limited. Someone always has to be it's like the Yuri Gagarin myth. Someone has to be the Death Watch officer of this podcast, just in case, in case our sins should come back to haunt us.
You have to be here as the official sin eater on short notice.
You have to be here watching the Patreon number go down like a dying cosmonaut's heartbeat
Makarov
monitor.
in hand.
Yeah, you have to watch it die. You have to comfort the podcast as the fans abandon it. Paisley, shut the fuck up.
Her meteor training is meteor training is not helping.
My meteor. I've been meteor training my cat. She is incredibly destructive. She will just barge into anything.
Yeah, she's getting ready to become a kinetic impactor.
I mean, yeah, whenever she kinetically impacts my pop filter or headbutts my face, I interpret that as being close enough.
Hitting your filter at Mach 10, creating a plasma spray.
Yeah, my cat can do a headbutt the way a pistol shrimp can. She briefly creates like a cavitation bubble against my forehead.
Brain damage? Nah, there's only solutions in this household. Hello, listener. Welcome to...
All right. Yeah, listener. You have clicked on a podcast with the customary all caps, very huge standing content warning, and you're hearing us talk about this dumb shit.
We need to have our fun in the front because in the back it's going to be oops suffering.
This is just the worst way of describing the world's shittiest mullet. Fun in the front, pure misery in the back. What does that even look like?
It's a cognito hazard. You get shown the most disastrous cut of all time. It's just
a hole in the back of your head, like that Spiral anime.
You just see the fucking cognito hazard and your brain just goes, we out, and then gone.
But yeah, listener, circling back around to this, we are going to give our big content warning on this. This episode is not going to be quite as bad as some of the previous ones and some of the later ones. But at the end of the day, we are talking about Mittelwerk. We are talking about genocide, the deliberate use and extermination of slave labor. And we are going to be talking about, in this episode specifically, pure terrorism, the intentional use of terror weapons on civilians purely to cause chaos with no intent of any kind of military objective. If you don't want to hear that kind of stuff, don't listen. That is my recommendation. In part 3, we discussed the foundation and first months of operation of Mittelwerk, or Central Works Limited, a private German business that just so happened to produce V-2 ballistic missiles for the German army in an underground death factory using thousands of concentration camp inmates as slave laborers. Starting in August 1943, thousands of inmates, mostly German criminals, Soviet POWs, and French resistance fighters, were worked to death as the Germans rushed to get Mittelwerk up and running as quickly as possible. Inmates lived in the tunnels for up to 9 months. Construction only started on the outdoor Dora concentration camp once the V2 production line was up and running. This worked. By January 1944, the first missiles were rolling off the assembly line for testing. By April, they were being ramped up to full production ahead of the planned missile barrage on London. By that point, more than 5,000 people had died in the tunnels of Mittelwerk. Thousands more would follow.
Also, I was going to say something that still constantly fucked with me through the last part was the deliberate hanging of the bodies just low enough to the ground that you would have to interact with them if you were walking by.
Yeah, so that being in Hall 41, the big final assembly room that also used the assembly cranes as makeshift gallows.
Yeah, well, realistically, all the people running this place should have become fucking ornaments.
Yeah, I mean, poetic justice could have been served, but largely wasn't. Now, as I mentioned in part 3, in this episode we are going to be taking a dive back into the world of Nazi internal politics. I tried to keep this series focused just on the factory, just on Mittelwerk itself, but things going on elsewhere in Germany have a big impact on Mittelwerk. So I believe it's important to cover them too, in order to get the full picture. At the same time, instead of going over sourcing, for this part it is the exact same as part 3 and all of the sources you can find linked below. Instead of doing that normal discussion, I figured it would be useful to do a quick dramatis persona, however you say it. We're going to be going over some of the characters involved because this series has been going on for a while. It has spanned across several episodes and months now. And these people are coming in from all kinds of different angles. You've got the army, you've got the SS, you have the rocket engineer crews. So what I'm going to do is work down a list of these various figures that are important to this episode and what they are doing in 1944. So I'll start us off with the favorites. Major General Walter Dornberger, the original military leader of the German Army rocket program starting back in the 1930s, though he would lose influence over the V2 once the SS got involved. Later, he took command of the Wasserfall surface-to-air missile program and eventually escaped to the US as part of Operation Paperclip, where he worked for the Air Force developing guided missiles.
Oh, I know Wasserfall. Okay.
Next up, SS Sturmbannführer Wernher von Braun, technical director and design head of the A4 missile program, and despite maintaining that he knew nothing about Mittelwerk, he was the head of the Mittelbau Dora planning office. Escaped to the US as part of Operation Paperclip, became the director of the Marshall Space Flight Center, and led America to the moon in the moon race.
Some parts that are very, very enlightening. Director of.
Yeah. Later on, through all of his stuff, he will claim he never went to Mittelwerk. He did not know what was going on there. He was on the planning committee.
I knew nothing about this. I was only the director. I wasn't involved in the day-to-day operations.
All of those sketches, I thought they were just going to be I sketched stick figures working on all the V2s. I didn't think those were actually going to be people.
All I said was get this many entities.
And at best, even following that logic, the best that you can get from him is basically the song, the Wernher von Braun song of just hey, I only cared about the rockets getting done. Once the rockets are up, who cares where they come down? It, literally just him saying, it's not my department, that was someone else.
When it literally was your fucking department.
Yes, yeah. Not to mention that someone else is his brother, who also escapes to the US. We'll get to him in a second.
You odious bastard.
Next up, Reichsfuhrer SS Heinrich Himmler, who was obviously the head of the SS, and in our story, he took an early interest in the A4 missile program and inserted the SS into it, slowly replacing the army for security, and then administration, and then production, and we'll get to more of that here.
Oh yes, air quotes, security, as in how many people can we funnel in here?
Exactly, yeah. And he is also the main missile supporter within Hitler's inner circle. Brackets only as much as, he only cares about it so he can steal it. Next up, SS Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler, who was Himmler's personal architect, designed the Auschwitz concentration camp. He organized the razing of the Warsaw Ghetto in 1943. I do need to add a distinction here. I got mixed up in a couple of earlier episodes. specifically episodes 2 and 3. I said that Kammler had been involved in the raising of Warsaw after the Warsaw Uprising. However, I got the two Warsaw Uprisings mixed up. So the first one happens in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1943, and the second one happens later in 1944. That's the one like where the Soviets get close, the uprising happens, and the Soviets wait for it to finish. Doesn't let Kammler off the hook for anything. He still is a horrific piece of shit. I still maintain that he is history's most evil civil engineer. And he was also the lead designer of the Mittelwerk Dora facility. As we'll talk about in this episode, he consolidated control over the entire V2 missile program, eventually becoming military leader of the Army and SS launch battalions. He's an architect. Kammler disappeared at the end of the war. There is evidence that he was interviewed by US intelligence in 1945, but nothing more than that. His final fate remains a mystery. And normally I'd think that's like pretty suspicious, is that like, he was interviewed by the US. But the US like has never been shy about saying, oh yeah, those Nazis, we took them in. So I can't imagine why they would look at Kammler and think like, oh, this guy, we got to be super careful about this. Reich Minister Albert Speer, head of German war production after the death of Fritz Todt. He was an enthusiastic supporter of the V2 program from early on and helped it secure priority manufacturing, rights, and supplies. Later lost influence due to illness, the SS, and a little bit of suspicion around an assassination attempt against Hitler. 1944 was not a good year for Mr. Speer. He survived the war and was sentenced to 20 years in prison at the Nuremberg trials, and during that time he tried to build himself up. Like, if you've ever heard the term the good Nazi, it's Albert Speer. He spent all of his time immediately after the war, after his capture, trying to build himself up as just like, no, I was just like fighting for my country. I actually tried to kill Hitler one time.
So PR. It was
basically
PR.
Yeah. So he serves 20 years in prison and he dies a free man in 1981. Despite the fact that even just in what we have talked about so far, he organized, like he was in charge of the organization, like the Todt organization that organized all of these different slave laborers that would like farm them out to different companies. If you're Volkswagen, you go to the Todt organization, you go to Operation Todt and say, I need 500 dudes, and they supply them to you on a truck. All right. Georg Ricki, General Director of Central Works Limited.
I'm sorry for interrupting, but you're right. We're getting mad.
Mr. Ricki. I'm really fighting hard not to make like a Trailer Park Boys joke of like if Ricky was running a concentration camp.
What was Ricky doing during the war?
During 1939 to 1945. But yeah, Georg Ricki, he's the business guy. He is the general director of Mittelwerk Limited. He's the company guy. He is effectively the CEO of this death factory. He was previously a manager at DMAG, a German tank manufacturer. He was also involved in the mass execution of prisoners, normally accusing them of being saboteurs. Ricki is one of the guys who is like actively ordering and administrating the mass hangings. Ricki escaped to the US in Operation Paperclip to work for the US Army. He designed both the Führer bunker in Berlin and the Raven Rock nuclear bunker in Maryland. Yay!
I hate you saying so Ricki
like, if the US...
Quinn, you motherfucker, you have introduced Ricki into the brain, and that is all I hear now. Just flashbanged by, hey, what was Ricki doing? Then, bam, this.
I was going to say, Ricky's the name of the guy who my first girlfriend got married to after I broke up with her.
Hell yeah.
Okay, cool. He's a shithead.
All right, we have to establish if that guy has an H in his name. So, next up is Arthur Rudolph, operations director at Mittelwerk, responsible for overseeing inmates and ensuring proper assembly of the missiles. In that role, we know that he was involved in numerous executions of supposed saboteurs, by which could be saboteurs, it could just be people fucking up because they are slaves. And that includes mass hangings.
That's something else. We're getting into the things that piss off Chris again. Yeah. Maybe it's the fact that you have them underground in literally the nightmare hole. No, they can't possibly be fucking up because of that. And despite the fact that, they've been robbed of their food for like the 8th night in a row.
But clearly, people thought he learned valuable experience doing that because he escaped to the US in Operation Paperclip and became the project manager for the Saturn V booster.
Cool, they should have speared him onto the launch abort system. Just give him the butcher bird fucking treatment.
Oh. And finally, Magnus von Braun, Werner von Braun's younger brother and a guidance engineer working on the A4, specializing in gyroscopes. Unlike brother Werner, Magnus worked directly at Mittelwerk, overseeing the production of the missile's guidance system. He was also, compared to, like von Braun, you can always argue whether he was a Nazi or a opportunist. Not so Magnus. Magnus was a die-hard Nazi until he died, and he had a known record for abusing prisoners both at Peenemünde and Mittelwerk. He escaped to the US in Operation Paperclip and eventually joined Chrysler's missile division. Yay! So these are the pieces of shit that we're dealing with. And fully more than half of them that I listed off escaped to the US as part of Operation Paperclip.
You know, I really want to see what happens when a Dodge Daytona hits this man while doing a $180 on a test track. And I will brook no further just argument. It should have happened.
Right.
It should have happened.
I want the Department of Cartoonish Deaths to have, worked a little bit harder here.
I am in favor of like drawing and quartering someone as long as we can make them do like the Stretch Armstrong thing first.
Like, I don't want them being a martyr. I want them, dude got ran over.
For what it's worth, a lot of the problems with the missile program that we're going to talk about here are caused directly by stupid Nazis. Like just apparatchiks getting in the way.
Call back to a previous episode that the listeners should have listened to. Just the one guy holding a bottle of just, T-Stoff and C-Stoff in each hand, staring at the sky as the bomb hits him square in the nuts.
Operation Crossbow.
Now, where we left off in the last part, it was April 1943. The A4 missile factory at Mittelwerk was complete and ramping up production, and test missiles were being launched weekly at a military test site in Blizna, Poland. The Allies were aware of the German missile program. They had launched Operation Hydra half a year prior to try and knock out the missile development site at Peenemünde, and they were frequently bombing the various launch bunkers being built along the French coast opposite Britain. So as a reminder, with the V2, like pretty much right up until it's launched, no one really knows, like ballistic missiles are not an established science. No one knows whether we're going to go with the silo method or the mobile launcher method. And, in our history, why do I say our history like it's an alternate history? Eventually, missiles would kind of wind up in either of those two things, but the V2, Hitler likes the idea of building these like giant, huge concrete bunkers that will have, like, some of them have a revolving floor that they will be able to shoot the missiles up like a revolver. And at the same time, Dornberger and a lot of the other, like the army, they want these things to be launched from mobile launch systems. And that is what they are specifically testing with at Blizna. So these bombing raids and reconnaissance flights would be collectively known as Operation Crossbow. And like we talked about in parts 2 and 3, once the Allies had evidence of German long-range missiles, they put an extreme priority on trying to knock them out before they could be fired on Allied cities. Part of this was a genuine will to not have bombs raining down on civilians and factories, but part of it was also because Allied planners they wildly overestimated how good these weapons would be. For example, they thought that the A4, the V2, that it could carry a 10-ton warhead almost 1,000 miles, whenever the operational V2 could only carry a 1-ton warhead about a fifth of that range.
Ooh.
Yeah, and this panic got to the point where at various times in 1944, almost half of all Allied bombing missions that could have been directed at like gun factories, tank factories, they were being directed solely for crossbow stuff. They were bombing Peenemünde over and over and over again, even though it had already largely been abandoned. Another part of this is that American intelligence got it in their head that Peenemünde was where the Nazi nuclear program was based, and they also thought that the Nazis were ahead in the nuclear race. So, like, Peenemünde is abandoned at this point. It is cratered to the point where it looks like the surface of the moon. They are just bombing it over and over and over again because they think that there is something there.
Like, there is some surface penetration that can be used to launch a rocket. Meanwhile, they've absolutely scraped it clear.
Yeah, and like test stand 7, the famous like main test stand at Peenemünde, is fully wiped out like months into this process, and they just keep going.
Yeah, they blew its shit smooth off.
And there is actually an interesting discussion to be had. A couple of the books I read go into this about whether Operation Crossbow, you know, like we look at the V2 and we look at the German, specifically Hitler's obsession with super weapons as these like innovative but dumb projects that are like not military viable. And by dump trucking all of the resources into them, he winds up weakening his military. And there's a discussion to be had about whether or not Operation Crossbow is kind of the same thing, because like they are, you have this phantom weapon system that can't do all that much damage, and you have half of the Allied bombing fleet hunting that phantom weapon system, which means that the Allied bombers are not bombing factories. They're not stopping, those bombers are not hurting German useful production. So like whenever it comes to the V2, whenever it comes to the vengeance weapons, both sides kind of buy into the hype, and they seem to waste a lot of resources either building them or trying to stop them. But the A4 wasn't the first German superweapon fired against Britain. That honor would go to the Fi-103 flying bomb, the world's first cruise missile. Hitler had always planned to unleash his new vengeance weapons against London and had given full operational command of missile units to General Heinemann, who we talked about in Part 3, under the new LXV Corps of the German Army. And this is specifically like a military unit that is like, they are going to handle the V1, they're going to handle the V2, any future. They also get issued a bunch of other rocket stuff like the Nebelwerfer, they get given a bunch of those. Their whole shtick, the LXV Corps, is that they're the rocket guys. The original plan was to start the bombardment on June 20th, 1944, but then on June 6th, Operation Overlord forced Hitler's hand. D-Day, the massive American, British, and Canadian landings in France finally opened up a new front in the war. And while the fighting was brutal, the Allies largely achieved their aims. Within a few days, they had pushed inland and established a beachhead that the Germans couldn't push them out of. Hitler, being Hitler, flipped shit and ordered as many cruise missiles launched as quickly as possible. And there is an interesting note here in that another thing that the Allied planners kind of got wrong about these weapons is they thought that the V1, they thought that the Fi-103, they had evidence of it. They saw test sites at Peenemünde, they had resistance notes of it. They thought these things would be fired tactically. There was a very real concern among Allied planners that as the D-Day fleets came in, they would be hit by like basically sea-skimming V1s. That was something that they believed the Fi-103 could be used for. So on the day of D-Day, a lot of these planners are really like pleasantly surprised that they have not been hit by a huge wave of cruise missiles. However, that was not the main target or use case of the Fi-103. Hitler's missile blitz, as he called it, started on June 13th, 1944, and it actually started with a sputter. The crews of the LXV Corps had been so rushed to fire. Like, this is a week after D-Day. They are not even in, like, the West at this point. They have to drive out there, get prepped, build these launch rails. They had been so rushed that they could only set up 7 launch rails, and they only fired 10 missiles, of which only 1 actually managed to reach London. But the German crews recovered quickly, setting up a total of 64 launchers in France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Soon, around 100 missiles a day would be fired against London. By the end of June, and I'll remind you that they started on the 13th, more than 2,000 missiles had been launched and 1,700 civilians were dead. On the 17th, Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels introduced the new weapon to the world as the V1, Vergeltungswaffen, or Vengeance Weapon. I probably mispronounced that. I don't care.
You have to respect it enough to pronounce it correctly.
Well, I did actually look it up before.
No, hush,
Vergeltungswaffen, whatever. It's the vengeance weapon.
No, looking up how to pronounce it properly so that you can more accurately pronounce it improperly.
Wrong. Yeah, so that I don't accidentally get it right. Quote, "No one was more elated than the Führer himself. The combined American and British bombing offensive against German targets had taken its toll, and now he could strike back. On June 17th, 1944, he flew to France to congratulate his generals for opening the offensive. General Heinemann suggested to Hitler that if the V1 was to alter the course of the war in any fashion, production of the flying bomb would have to be stepped up. Many more V1s would need to be fired. And this is where we need to go back to Mittelwerk, because the pace of the V1 launches quickly burned through the missile stockpiles and what the slave laborers at the Volkswagen factory in Fallersleben could produce. So, in the same way that Mittelwerk is ramping up to build V2s, Volkswagen has their own slave labor division, and they're building the flying bombs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, good old, well, I mean, I know we went through the list in part 3 of just all of the, Rheinmetall, Volkswagen, practically any big German manufacturing concern that is still around today, was doing so, was around then, and building tanks and super weapons and using slave labor. You know, it's funny, whenever we do like the Ace Combat stuff, I'm always asking myself, like, why do they keep North Grunder around? Why haven't they just, like, burned that entire company? Meanwhile, yeah. Meanwhile, me buying my fucking Mitsubishi products.
Mm-hmm.
So, basically, yeah, like, there is not enough production to keep up this pace of V1 launches. They are launching around 100 missiles a day against London. And, like, while we'll get to this, the Brits get pretty good at shooting them down. That still means that dozens are landing on London every day. SS General Kammler provided a convenient answer. He had this nice factory. He had Mittelwerk. And if they wanted to build more V1s, he could just expand the factory. And brackets, as part of this, he would also gain control over the production of a new superweapon, which is kind of his thing. He's actively consolidating control over all Nazi missile projects. And this plan had actually worked for Kammler before. In early 1944, he had pitched Hitler on expanding the Mittelwerk factory to manufacture engines for fighters, because the above-ground factories were being repeatedly flattened by Allied bombers. Hitler liked the idea and offered Kammler additional manpower in the form of 5,000 Jews from the newly occupied Hungary. So in 1944, basically, like, anytime the Nazis decide that an ally isn't, like, good enough for them, they invade and conquer. And this goes, like, right up to the end of the war. So, like, as soon as Italy starts wavering a little bit, the Nazis invade it. As soon as Hungary starts wavering a little bit, the Nazis invade it. And one of the first things they do in these areas, like, any of these countries are not good places to be a Jew in, but they are normally better than being in Nazi Germany or Nazi-occupied territory. So as soon as Hungary gets taken over, any of the Jews living there are immediately routed into the concentration camp system. Also, as it turned out, Hungarian Jews were the main contingent working in the Volkswagen factory on the V1s, so Kammler assumed that he could just transplant them to the Mittelwerk tunnels without any need for training. These workers, specifically working on the V1 missiles and Junkers engines, they were like segregated from the main factory. They were on the far northern end of the ladder that is Mittelwerk. And they were kept separate from the Reds and Greens working on V2s. They were also, and this needs to be distinguished, the only Jews who were ever assigned to Dora to work. There are also some reports of some French resistance members who were Jews being sent, but they weren't known to be Jews. They were sent because they were resistance fighters. Even in a death camp, the Nazis maintained their clear hierarchies. The Jews were too untrustworthy to be allowed near Germany's new advanced weapon. The engines and the V1, they could handle that, but they were deliberately kept as far from the ballistic missiles as possible. And this is the peak of Mittelwerk operations. From July 1944 onwards, the factory churned out aircraft engines, V1 cruise missiles, and V2 ballistic missiles by the thousands. It also churned through more than 50 people a day, on average. And just like how Hitler's rage over D-Day had expanded the factory, the lives of Mittelwerk slave laborers were about to get significantly worse because of another one of his tantrums.
Operation Valkyrie.
I'm going to start this off with a quote. On July 20th, 1944, Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg left a bomb in a briefcase in a conference room at the Wolf's Lair headquarters at Rastenburg, where Hitler was meeting with his top military aides. After arming the bomb, von Stauffenberg slipped out of the meeting. He witnessed the large explosion from outside and, convinced that Hitler must have been killed, flew to Berlin to join the other plotters. Their plan to kill Hitler and then seize control of the Nazi government hinged on something called Operation Valkyrie. This was not their plan. This was something that was on the books. It was a military order. It was like a continuation of order kind of thing, like a designated survivor measure. Where
gotcha.
This is something
a continuation of government.
Yes, yeah. And the use cases for this is that, like, the specific use cases is if a city, like, if the Allies bomb a city so bad that, like, the cops aren't able, like, if the police station, if the firefighters, if the government buildings get knocked out by bombings, the army comes in and restores order. If there is a revolution, and this is actually in Operation Valkyrie as one of its main, like, this is when you activate it. If the slave laborers at the factory have a revolt, you activate Valkyrie and you go in and you restore order. And finally, if Hitler's dead, if there is, like, not a clear succession, you activate Valkyrie, you send in the troops and you restore order until, like, something can be figured out. So that is the plan. Unfortunately, Hitler survived with only minor wounds and the plot quickly fell apart. General Fromm, one of the plotters, and actually Walter Dornberger's direct superior, turned on Stauffenberg and had him shot to try and maintain his own innocence. So basically, like, as soon as this starts falling apart, some of the more cowardly plotters turn on the others and say, like, oh, I caught the plotter, look at that, don't worry, I already had him killed, brackets so that he couldn't inform on me. This didn't work for Fromm. Fromm gets captured, tortured, and executed.
Being gently disposed of because your excuse was so shitty.
Yeah. And in the fallout from the July 20th plot, I believe between 100 and 200, like, there is a widespread purge of army officers. Dornberger had no clue any of this was happening. He was actually on his way to army headquarters to give a routine report to Fromm on the missile project. Like, he's just going to talk to his boss.
And then getting absolutely waylaid by bullshit.
Yeah. When he arrived at the War Ministry, he found the corpses of dead officers in a heap in front of the door, left there by the SS.
Holy shit!
Yeah, no, I am not kidding. As a warning, like, after these guys are shot, like, Dornberger walks past the big corpse pile in the lobby and recognizes a couple of officers in it. Just kind of like, huh, well. So he goes for his meeting, waits a few hours, and is informed, like, yeah, General Fromm's not really going to be able to, like, take your meeting anymore, bud.
He has joined the pile.
He has been integrated into the swastika cube.
A few hours later, SS boss Heinrich Himmler arrived at the headquarters and, like, met with Dornberger, met with all these officers, with orders from Hitler to formally take command of the entire German military. In Hitler's mind, it had always been the army holding him back. They had argued against starting the war, and then they'd failed to win it. And now they had finally tried to kill him. While it didn't happen all at once, the July 20th plot set in motion a process by which the SS would come to own just about everything in Germany. SS generals ordered the army and navy and Luftwaffe around. SS officials ran the factories that used to belong to Albert Speer. And the A4 program was no exception. After taking over Peenemünde and Mittelwerk, one of the very few things the SS did not own was the actual firing units, which were still technically under the army. So that's the LXV Corps.
So they owned production, but just, hey, army, here you go.
Yeah, they would deliver the missiles to the army, and they also owned administration because, like, Georg Ricci works for them.
Fantastic. Fuck 'em.
Yeah. The SS had been slowly icing the army and air force out of their missile programs for years. But weirdly, Himmler wasn't actually in a rush to finish them off, because the A4 wasn't, like, it's weird. I know across this series we have talked about so many ups and downs of, like, the A4 is popular. No, it's not. That is just, like, I know that sounds kind of like up and down and whatnot. That is the reality. And that is just the reality of working in Nazi Germany at the whim of Adolf Hitler. Your project will be, like, up and down like a sinusoid, entirely dependent on how this old drug-addled wreck feels.
Your project will enter a Fugit cycle, inevitably hitting the ground at Mach 1 and maybe you hitting a noose, but probably not.
And in mid-1944, the A4 is not that popular because they're having all of these failed tests. Like, over and over, they're flying these rockets out of Blizna, and fully 40% of them are exploding in midair. And that's only the ones that lift off. Like, the A4 is an incredibly buggy weapon. on, like, it's badly designed at the best of times, and it's being produced by people in slave labor conditions. So, like, the rockets coming out of Mittelwerk are crippled by, like, bad problems. And we talked about in part 3, like, some of that is deliberate sabotage. A lot of these inmates get very good at, like, hiding the bad welds. But there's also all of these problems. Like, no one knows how ballistic missiles work yet. So they are just left out. Like, whenever they're being transported out to Poland, they're just being left out in the rain. Whenever they arrive at these launch sites, whether it be in Poland or eventually in the Netherlands, they're rusty. They have been sitting outside for like a month at times. Long story short, the A4 was not popular. Hitler was excited about the V1, and he was disappointed in the A4. Quote, "While the A4 was raining terror on London, the promoters of the V2 were still struggling with the breakup dilemma. Hitler was losing patience with the rocket and wondered if it would ever be ready. On July 6, 1944, he ordered that another underground factory that was being excavated by slave laborers at Ebensee in Austria, codenamed Cement, should be given to tank production." So he is so pissed off with these A4 delays that he actively is just like, no second factory for you. Basically, we're back to the A4 being in the doghouse. The V1 is working, so it's Hitler's favorite. It's always been his favorite, and it always will be his favorite. And he absolutely has never made fun of it and called it Goering's folly. That didn't happen. And then the V1, like, this is... I hate that I'm finding this kind of amusing, but it is just how fucking, like, unpredictable Hitler is, how his mood will change on a dime. The V1 is not invincible. Unlike the V2, like, it is difficult to shoot down. It moves very quickly, but you can shoot it down and you can see it on radar, which means that very quickly, the Allies, the British, the Americans, the Canadians, everyone in Britain finds ways of mitigating the V1. They shoot them down, they track them on radar. Unlike the V2, unlike the A4, which can be launched from these mobile positions, the V1 is more stationary. You need to build these huge, conspicuous concrete rails to fire it out of. And even the ones that don't crash, a lot of them crash in the ocean, they now have to get through, like, rings of British anti-aircraft fire.
They have to get through a staged anti-air defense network.
Yes. And what that means is that, like, it's still entirely too many getting through. Each of these things that lands is still carrying a 1-ton bomb that can kill dozens of people. But out of 100 being launched every day, the Germans are lucky to get, like, 30 through. So, and, like, it would be significantly worse. Like, that's why the start of the barrage is so awful, is that the Allies have none of the ways of mitigating it.
Thinking about how awful it would be to be on the receiving end, and it's just kind of like a, what's the weather report, missiles.
Right. Well, we will talk about that in a bit, but, like, there is a distinct difference in the terror between the V1 and the V2, because the V1 lets you know that it's coming. It is subsonic, and it makes a very loud noise like a broken carburetor. Whereas the V2 comes in at Mach 3, so you're just, you know, basically British people described it as like, I would plan my day around a V1. The V2, I'm just going to go to work and pray I get home. Another thing to remember with the V sights is that all of these weapons, whether the V1 or the A4, they have limited range. The V1 can only fly like 250 kilometers or like 160 miles, which means that as soon as the Allies just like push the front line back a little bit, it will be physically too far to reach London. So the main thing that eventually stops the V1 and V2 barrages isn't Operation Crossbow. It's not actually these bombing campaigns. It's just the fact that the Allied troops push them physically back until they can't shoot anymore. I had a map. I will send it. Actually, I'm going to look it up now. So let's all open this. So what you can see here is this is a map of different German V weapon sites in France, Belgium, or these are specifically in France.
Oh, that's not a long range.
No, and any of the like 150 miles. Once you're past that second line there, you are beyond the range of the V1. So like some of them they go up to Belgium and the Netherlands, but like just getting from the French coast to London is already 100 miles. So the Allies only have to push them like 50, and then the V1 is useless.
Like, these are just barely meeting the description of short-range ballistic missiles. Like,
yeah, well, this is cruise missiles here, but still. whenever it flies, the V2 is not much better. It only has 200 miles of range.
V1 and V2 are just circling the drain in my mind.
You can also see in this image, and this is crucial, a lot of the launch sites are over in Cherbourg. So a lot of this stuff is being fired off. So that's what's called the Cotentin Peninsula, and this is actually to the west of where the Allies land. So almost as soon as D-Day happens, that little peninsula with Cherbourg on it, American troops under Omar Bradley cut it off, and about a third of V1 launch sites are just lost instantly. There's also the massive V2 bunker at Sotavast that is lost because Allied troops just walk into it. Again, I cannot stress enough like how much of like Operation Crossbow is diverting all of this bombing power into hitting these V sites. The thing that stops them is when you've got the massive Coupole bunker at Viserne. Canadian troops just walk into it, and now it can't be used anymore.
What are you going to do? Walk in? Meanwhile, the humble Allies. Right. Like, but also still, for a cruise missile, 150 miles is pretty fucking short.
Yeah, and I don't want to in fairness the V1. It is the first cruise missile in existence, unless we're counting some like early Chinese stuff. Which never mind, it's not the first cruise missile in existence. The sea skimming double warhead Chinese anti-ship missile from like the year 500 absolutely is.
Oh hell yeah! Let's get some nonsense going.
So all of this together means that by August, so like this barrage starts in mid-July. By August, launch crews were pushed out of northern France completely, and by October 1944. V1s had been pushed back so far that they could not reach Britain at all, though they would still be fired like right up until a month before the end of the war. Mostly, like as they get pushed back, as cities get liberated, their targets shift from London, it becomes Antwerp, it becomes Paris, and as the Germans are progressively pushed back, eventually they are firing them on German cities that have been taken by the Allies.
Operation Penguin.
After an uprising by French resistance fighters and a week of battle, Paris was liberated on August 25th, 1944. In response, Hitler quickly ordered that all fixed missile projects in France, like the massive missile bunkers at Viserne and Roquetoire, be abandoned. I also love that there is a rocket facility in a town named Roquetoire.
It's way too on the nose.
Nominative determinism. He then announced the commencement of Operation Penguin, a mass A4 ballistic missile attack on London and Paris that would be started as soon as possible. Himmler set the opening launch date as September 5th. So this is also where the SS opted to take full control. So technically they have had full authority since mid-July, which is when the assassination plot fails. Only now do they try and like do their power move, do they try and like stance on the army and steal the entire V2 project. At a Penguin planning meeting in Brussels a few days later, Kammler boldly told the army officers present that he was not just in charge of A4 production, but that he would be taking charge of its operational deployment too, effectively trying to pull a coup on General Heinemann and Dornberger over control of the LXV Corps. Hilariously, the army officers demanded that he show them any kind of official orders proving this. Kammler didn't have any. In fact, the LSV Corps Chief of Staff, Colonel Walter, he had a message that he had received from Army High Command that explicitly instructed him not to give Kammler control of the missiles. And this order called out Kammler specifically as being completely irrelevant to their mission, because they had predicted that the SS would try to pull some shit like this. Kammler's coup attempt was thwarted, temporarily, because he immediately ran and cried to Himmler, who 2 days later Himmler goes back with Kammler in person to the army and says, like, this is my special boy. You have to give him your missiles.
How dare you hurt my special little lad?
my sweet little architect of death.
Don't worry, he'll clean himself up soon.
Just like snot pouring out of his like fucking face.
Yeah, I will infantilize them to the end of the world. And I mean in the most derogatory sense, because none of them deserve to have lived.
And while the LXV Corps basically offered Kammler the chance to like be a figurehead, they said like, hey, yeah, we can put you in charge and then we'll handle all the army guy stuff. He wanted to be a hands-on leader and immediately set out fucking everything up. There are a couple of examples of this, but one I just wanted to bring up is in later like launch operations, they don't have like everything is slammed together so quickly that they don't have any like gas tanks. They don't have any like fuel trucks to actually fuel all of the vehicles that go with the V2. So Kammler's just like, why not use some of the rocket fuel trucks?
Oh, good.
They don't put the rocket fuel in. What they do is they empty the rocket fuel. They put gasoline into the rocket fuel tanks. But the rocket fuel tanks have a very special coating that immediately gets ruined as soon as gas is added. So they have to go back, like, they
Hell
delay...
yeah, fuck them.
They delay the start of launching missiles on London because Kammler fucks up and has them ruin all of their fuel trucks.
Amazing.
Yeah, his first order of business was isolating Dornberger, who he hated personally. He removed the last bits of influence he had over the missile team, and he hoped that he would be allowed to kill Dornberger and have him shot. This is something that Kammler threatened to Dornberger's face repeatedly.
I will have you shot. Pew pew. Tee hee.
Just doing like finger guns across the boardroom table. This grudge got so infantile and stupid that Kammler's boss, SS General Eutner, got involved. Quote, Eutner was outraged at Kammler's treatment of Dornberger. He felt it was insufferable that Kammler had threatened to have Dornberger shot if he dared approach Eutner himself. Considering Dornberger's background and knowledge of the rocket, Eutner refused to expel him. He ordered the two men to work together for the good of the program. So we've got our getting along together Hugo Boss Nazi uniform that these two guys are being forced to wear. And just like, if you are such a dick that an SS general is ordering you to tone it down, like that is how that is how psychotic Kammler is. Like, we already know that he is incredibly cruel. We already know that he is able to like engineer cruelty into everything he does. But he is also a fucking child whenever it comes to anyone being cooler than him.
What a shithead.
Yeah, like, you'd think, like, a lot of the reasons you hate the Nazis are for all the shit they did, but, like, the more you look into them, the more you realize, like, oh, they're also just, like,
not only were these truly, like, horrific people, they were also just infantile shitheels.
Like and I guess that's everything with, like, the inner circle of the Nazis, too. Like, all of these fucking man-children begging for Hitler's attention. Kammler fits right into that.
I'm more pissed off now that they weren't Why couldn't we have more wind chimes? I think that's vague enough to, get over censoring.
Dornberger's right up there. He's up there for the things he did. Even if he, like, good. Dornberger didn't act like a child. He deserved a lot more than he got.
Let me guess. He was one of the people that got away because,
he's a paperclip guy. Although he has a falling out with von Braun at one point and headhunts a lot of the NASA folks to go work for the Air Force with him.
Of course, it's
Yeah. Now stuck with Dornberger, Kammler turned his attention to dumber ideas, like replacing the trained Army launch crews with untrained SS conscripts. And I do mean conscripts here. One launch crewman, a teenager named Heinz Vellman, remembered being conscripted into the Army. Like, they get all the kids lined up in ranks to go die on the Russian front, only for an SS officer to swoop in and ask, like, hey, who wants to volunteer for the SS? Everyone raise your hands. No one raises their hands, so he's just like, all right, we'll pick volunteers. And out of 100 kids in this, like, Army, like, rank, they're just like, yeah, we'll take 95 of them. These are our volunteers. And these are the kids who are just picked at random, like, you're going to be a V2 crew member now.
I thought, honestly, they would have just been killed. Well, you don't want to be part of this, so...
We will get to it, but there is definitely a quality difference in the V2 launch batteries. So these SS kids, these conscripts, are sent off for training, and it does need to be said that this training happens in Mittelwerk. They are sent into the tunnels. They are told not to talk to the prisoners, but a bunch of them do. For what it's worth, the prisoners all basically said, like, we don't want it... Like, they made it very clear that they did not want to talk to the SS, because they, like... If you're a conscript, your punishment is like, you're going to swab the floors or something. If you're a concentration camp inmate, your punishment is death. You'll be sent to Hall 41. At the end of that training, though, this new SS unit, the SS Werfer Battery 500, would not be ready for the start of September, and Kammler was forced to make do with the trained army units. The Battalion 836, Battery 485, and the Elite Battery 444. With the A4 as ready as it was ever going to get, it still crashed a whole lot, but they had mostly solved the mid-air explosion thing. Kammler ordered his units west into the Netherlands, towards launch sites around the city of Den Haag, or The Hague. I probably mispronounced that. I have actually been there. Remember in part 3 we talked about how General Heinemann became convinced that the V2 had to be launched from concrete pads? You can find around the Netherlands, around parts of France and Belgium, circular concrete pads that were used for V2 launches. There are maps of them. I explored The Hague and found more than a few, just in like the middle of parks. Now, Kammler is also an idiot, so he had to give his command a new stupid name. They would be called the Division zur Vergeltung, or Vengeance Division, or as it's often written, Division ZV. Now, Battery 444 was considered the most elite of the various rocket launch crews because they had actually been the soldiers responsible for testing the A4 at Peenemünde and Blizna for the last 3-odd years. Compared to the other batteries, and especially the chucklefucks at SS Werfer 500, they worked faster, shot more accurately, and they had fewer launch casualties. I can happily report that the SS 500 had the most by a comfortable margin, which is good. We briefly talked about this in the last episode, but their elite status did not protect them from fucking up.
Hell yeah.
The first operational launch of an A4 ballistic missile was a failure. The 444 took a wrong turn, set up way too close to the front lines, and their motor pool was attacked by 30 Belgian partisans with machine guns. One senior command officer was killed and another was severely wounded. The next 2 attempts also failed, but only because the missile refused to take off. In both cases, it lifted off like an inch and then just fell right back onto the pad. The 4th attempt saw the missile take off but explode in midair. However, the 5th shot didn't break up. 5 minutes after liftoff, it landed in the suburbs of Paris, killing 6 and injuring another 36. On September 7th, Duncan Sandys, who we talked about earlier, the British intelligence analyst who had first theorized the existence of a Nazi missile program, gave a press conference in which he announced the imminent end of the V1 barrage on London. Between bombings of the launch site and advancing Allied troops, the V1s would be entirely out of range within a matter of days, he said. On the 8th, like he gives this press conference on the 7th, on the 8th, this is on every single newspaper. You know, this is the front line of the day. Everyone is talking about how, like, the bombings are just about to stop. And really, like, at the time, the Allies are advancing incredibly quickly into France, into Belgium. There is a very real expectation from people in Britain, from people in the liberated parts of Europe, that the war could be over by Christmas at, like, current pace. Berlin is not that far away, especially if the Germans keep collapsing. Then, that evening, a ballistic missile traveling at 3 times the speed of sound struck downtown London. It killed 3 people, injured 17, and flattened 11 homes. What surprised Londoners most wasn't the explosion. They'd been through the Blitz in 1940, and the last few months had seen thousands of doodlebugs, as locals called the V1 cruise missiles, dropping onto the city. They were used to the bombings. What surprised them was the lack of a warning. The V1 had a pattern to it. It flew with a loud buzzing sound like a broken carburetor, and then it went silent just as it began to dive toward the target. If you could hear it, you were safe. As soon as the buzzing stopped, you dove for cover. That was the pattern. But the A4, coming in at supersonic speeds, gave no warning. It simply hit. There was no avoiding it. There was no predicting it. 15 more missiles fell on London over the next week. The government tried to cover it up. They declared that each of these explosions was a broken gas main, which led Londoners to nickname the missiles flying gas mains.
Creative. A creative endearment for it.
At least they had some humor about it, despite how fucking grim.
I do appreciate, and you see this isn't unique to Britain, but like that kind of gallows humor approach to it, of like making fun of the thing that could kill you. In the same way that, yeah, like the V1, they call it a buzz bomb, they call it a doodle bug, stuff like that. And even like people quickly figure out like, no, this is a new German weapon, this is something new. People still nickname it the flying gas main. And that is the start of the V2 bombardment.
Operation Market Garden.
Now, this is more of just an extra that I wanted to talk about because it is very interesting. It doesn't impact Mittelwerk directly, but Mittelwerk and the V2 factor heavily into it. And what it is here was the largest failed airborne operation in military history. So something to understand about the Western Allies' advance into Europe after D-Day is that it started off moving incredibly quickly. It established this beachhead. It was liberating large portions of France. They liberated Paris. After that, though, Allied units quickly outran their supply lines. They didn't have, even once they take the port at Antwerp, it's still they need to recover it. The German, there are U-boats around. They can fire on ships coming in. Even as Allied troops are fighting 400, 600 miles away, all of the supplies, they don't have train lines. It has to come into the Normandy beaches and then be delivered by truck. So the further the Allies get without getting a real port like Antwerp up and running, the more incredibly dire their supply situation becomes. And the advance never truly, it doesn't stop, it doesn't bog down, but it slows to a crawl. For context, the Allies liberated Paris a little over 2 months after D-Day, but liberating the Netherlands, just a few hundred miles away, takes until May 1945, almost a full year after the landings. That is how, rapidly they slow down. There was also heavy disagreement among Allied generals on how to keep up the momentum. U.S. General Eisenhower supported what he called a broad front attack, hitting the Germans, just kind of grinding them down over the whole lines and exploiting them where they broke. And crucially, he didn't want to do this forever. He just wanted to do this until Antwerp was up and running. He wanted to he didn't want to rush things. He just wanted to take it at a reasonable pace until the supply issue could be sorted. British Field Marshal Montgomery, meanwhile, had significantly more bombastic and stupid plans. He wanted what was called a single thrust that would focus all of the Allied efforts into a narrow blitzkrieg that would punch through German lines in Holland and then make it to Berlin before Christmas.
Ooh, about that.
Yeah. What if we all run really quick?
Oh, Montgums, you silly, silly man.
And crucially, if he did this, they would punch through, famously, they are trying to get to Arnhem. They are trying to get to a city that has a bridge over the Rhine, and once they have a way of crossing the Rhine, they are into the German heartland. They can race to Berlin, is the theory. And in doing so, they would cut off almost all of the German units that are still in the Netherlands, which includes the Vengeance Division. This debate had been happening over several months, but what finally settled it in Montgomery's favor was a cable from the British General Staff that arrived 1 day after the start of the V2 barrage. Quote, 2 rockets, so-called V2, landed in England yesterday. Please report most urgently by what approximate date you consider you can rope off the coastal area contained by Antwerp, Utrecht, Rotterdam. When this area is in our hands, the threat from this weapon will probably have dispersed. So Eisenhower and Montgomery, they're having this debate back and forth, and like we talked about before, whenever it comes to the V weapons, the Allies are scared of them. The Allied leadership are scared of them. They you could argue, overreact in the same way that
the status of the
Crossbow
pants
did.
are thoroughly pissed at this point.
Yeah. Montgomery took the opportunity to convince the higher-ups that only his plan for a rapid strike through German lines could stop the rocket barrages quickly. Every day that Eisenhower's plan ground through German troops was another day of V2s landing down on London. Montgomery believed the German garrison in the Netherlands had grown soft over 4 years of occupation duty, and he dismissed intelligence showing that numerous SS tank units were being sent in to shore them up, calling them insignificant. Ultimately, this pitch worked, though it never convinced Eisenhower. Montgomery got the go-ahead, and he came up with Operation Market Garden. So this operation was split into 2 parts, Market and Garden. The Market part of the plan called for various airborne units, the US 101st and 82nd, the British 1st, and the Polish 1st Airborne, to be dropped far behind German lines and capture key bridges. Then, in Garden, an armored push by British tanks would punch through the disorganized Germans and race down a long one road and capture every single bridge along the way, ending in the city of Arnhem with a secured beachhead over the Rhine River, and nothing but clean sailing all the way to Berlin.
It's so easy. It's so easy. We're going to do it.
Why,
it's easy.
Why hasn't anyone done it yet?
Gentlemen, why hasn't anyone done this yet?
Have we considered driving there? What happens if people shoot us? Shoot them first.
Simply shoot them.
Shoot them back and
Yeah.
shoot them first. We're going to win it. We're in it to win it, boys.
Just jump over their lines.
Just shoot into the darkness at everything.
Like Market Garden fully being planned as Montgomery watches like a beetle fly over a small stream in his garden. Just yes.
And then just
Why don't we do that?
And then every single British serviceman just recreates the fucking death blossom of just firing at every
turning away from that little garden example as the beetle lands on an anthill and gets eaten alive.
And then just, like I said, every British serviceman just fires in every direction simultaneously.
And I also don't want this to sound like I'm trying to thread the needle here between saying like, oh, this entire thing was entirely due to the V2, but this isn't. Like, the V2 connection is also not small and insignificant. It's not a reach to say that this is part of the history of Market Garden, because Market Garden, like, the V2 is such a big deal for Market Garden that Montgomery actually rewrites the plans with about 2 days ahead of the go time. He significantly changes the plans in order to more effectively, hopefully, cut off Division ZV, the Vengeance Division. This also meant that, like, yeah, all of the plans, all of the practice, Operation Market Garden already has practically no preparation going into it. And then just a couple of days before go time, everyone has to go back to the drawing board. This is an incredibly poorly put together plan. Now, we are not a military history podcast, so I'm not going to go into a load of details here. Market Garden failed. The tanks were easy pickings for German troops because they were advancing single file down one long, small road. Meanwhile, airborne troops were dropped off target. The British 1st Airborne literally landed in the middle of an SS Panzer division and were immediately cut off. Of 10,000 paratroopers committed, only 2,300 broke out, an almost 80% casualty rate.
Jesus.
Yeah, something like 1,600 die, and then 6,000 are taken prisoner.
Montgomery, military genius, by the way.
It's the like, well, it just sounds like you're feeding paratroopers to the SS Panzer Division. I just get more and I drop them in.
I just keep putting them there. What do you mean?
But then I'm trying to think of who the "and then my daughter started crying" would be, because it's not Eisenhower, because Eisenhower is very clearly the whole time going like, please stop feeding American airborne units to that Panzer Division over there.
It's the U.S. Department of Defense just going, please.
Please no.
Are you telling us to put out another draft wave already? Draftees go burr.
So while the attack did force some of the V2 rocket crews, like, because the Germans, whenever Operation Market Garden starts, the Germans are not super confident either. They are like, oh shit, what is Montgomery going to do next? Like, they see all of these troops taking these bridges. That goes mostly successfully. And the big follow-up punch is like going to be this huge column of Allied tanks. The Germans are like preemptively retreating their V2 rocket crews for fear that they are going to be cut off. And then the armored push that happens is like very slow and single file. And as soon as the lead tank gets hit, the entire thing just stops. It did buy London a brief reprieve from the V2 launches of 2 days.
2 whole days.
2 whole days. That is how long it took for the V2 crews to get back to their launch sites around The Hague and start shooting again.
Good job, gentlemen. That's all you did.
Yes, good job, Field Marshal Montgomery.
Mittelwerk in 1944.
Now, I don't want this episode to give anyone the impression that things were just continuing uneventfully at Mittelwerk in the meantime. The goal here is to provide some wider historical context on what we'll be covering in the final episodes of this series. Why certain things happened at Mittelwerk, and who was pulling the levers, like way far up the chain of command. Hitler having a tantrum over the liberation of Paris causes things to change in Mittelwerk. None of what we're talking about made its way down to the prisoners trapped in the tunnels under Constein. For them, the only thing that changed was the pace of production, where new prisoners were shipped in from, and the opening of an entire constellation of subcamps all around the state of Thuringia. The only sign they had that the SS had seized control of the entire program was when SS conscripts rolled up into Mittelwerk for training.
Oh, okay.
The prisoners didn't know about the power struggles or the tantrums that raised their work quotas or the quality reports that sent dozens of men to the gallows for supposed sabotage.
These were simply told that here are the subversive elements.
Exactly, yeah. By Magnus von Braun, by Georg Ricci, by Arthur Rudolph.
Well, Werner von Braun guaranteed knew.
And Werner von Braun, we do know, was at Mittelwerk frequently. We know that he at least witnessed one of the mass hangings.
I want to keep his name in the focus at least a little bit. Because
that's why I introduced him as SS Obergruppenführer. That's his rank.
Yeah,
that's his job.
Also
he did that.
Just more closely pegged to also, hey, you remember all that nasty shit? Here's your boy.
Yeah. That doesn't go away with Paperclip. And we know it doesn't go away with Paperclip because some of these guys actually, like, Paperclip is hidden from the US public. They try and cover it up. They know that they want these guys, but they also know that a very large amount, like the same goes for every single allied country that takes these rocket guys. They know that their people will generally hate the idea. It's like if you go to the average person in the public and say, hey, we can maybe do rockets better if we accept this fucking Nazi, most of the people are going to say, kill him. Now, we will be covering all of that in the rest of the series, and I do hope that this like brief zoomed out picture helps with understanding what comes next. I can't say for certain how long this series is going to be.
It's evolving.
I'm thinking 5 or 6 episodes, but we're going to take it at the right pace and we're going to do it properly, is our attitude. So, listeners, Chris's, thank you for being part of this episode, and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Adios.
Thank you to everyone who have signed up to support the show, and a big shout out to all of our top tier patrons. Our cyborg cats are Boss, Kataiga Reptile, Charlie, Comrade Sleepy Bro, Daniel F, Graham E, Jesslyn T, George 2, standing in the corner at the insertion party, Kamo, Lane of the Wired, Matt, Mobius Striptease, Murray Motorsports, Mysterious Stranger, Number Negative, Oil Drum, Pat, Paul C, Rare Sprungle Spingus 3rd Edition, Skylab Bricks, Source Force, Spectre Cohen, Tortilla Baron, Vivek D, and Wingsmith. Our space dogs are A Union Thug, A. Blinken, Akiogo, Ack Guy is Best Guy, Ariel Badger Release, Agent Carter, Alice N, Andrew F, Andrew K, Angie, Angry Old Man Yada Yada, Anthony C, Atomic Hobbit, Autofox, Baron M, Batbay, Ben L, Boomzilla, Brian F, Brian L, C, Cantaloupe Was Taken, Carson D, Chainsaw Snuggling, Chris, Chris K, Cole C, Captain Lag, CSD 2016, Daddy Bongo, Daniel, Biz Smiley, Dom K, Dr. Shockmaster, Hank, Aaron, Eric J, Fractal Moonlight, Furious Luddite, George B, Grant K, Griffin, former snow shoveler of Burger King, Heiko S, Howl's Moving Pictures by Rush, Ian R, JM M, James A, James C, James H, James T, Jamie K, Jarl Breadmaker, Jerry M, Jedediah D, John C, John Boy D, Jonathan G, Jonathan W, Johntastic 20x6, Juan, Just Morse, Carathago Delenda S, Kate B, Kate D, Corbin the Dog, Lenswipe, Lorgath, Luke O, McLean C, Mar, Marto, Maritza, Matthew M, Mitchell L, Moomin Instrumentality Project, Narrow Ebb, New Name, Nicholas S, Norman W, Northeast Driver, NSFW NSA, Outlook Cove, Panda, PB, Poop Butt, Randall, RBK, Rato V, Riley, Sailor of Fortune, Scott K, Sean F, Sean H, Sensual Kazoo, Sean P, Sparks, Spirit of Thunder, Swanee, The Best Sean, The Bicycle Vixen, Thomas M, Tim P, Toasty Ken, Crash Do, Verash T, Brisk, Will W, William O, Zachary JB, Zap, Zemo, Zim, and Zombie Dwarf. Albert Count 182. Thank you for listening to another episode of Failure to Launch. If you want to follow us, we are Failure to Launch on Blue Sky and FT Launch Pod on Instagram. We also post our episodes with visual aids at Failure to Launch Podcast on YouTube. FTL intro and outro themes were provided by DJ Danarchy.